Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We recognize that a few folks are still in the process of joining. So while people go ahead and do that, I think we could just go ahead and begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Investment Readiness Program webinar on building a sustainable business. My name is Rachel Dragas. I am the Social Impact Program Manager here at Startup Canada. And behind the curtains today, we also have Anahita, who is our Communications Officer for the Investment Readiness Program and Social Impact at Startup Canada. So before we go ahead and begin here, I would like to firstly acknowledge the land on which I reside today. The City of Toronto acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of all Indigenous peoples. And we would really encourage you to also take a moment to acknowledge and reflect on the traditional territory that you are residing on today. So a bit of a background, Startup Canada is a national nonprofit that is the gateway to Canada's entrepreneurial ecosystem. So we are here to connect entrepreneurs with the support, the community, and the tools that they need to build a successful business in Canada. So we help support social entrepreneurs across the country and are also an ecosystem builder and a member of the Investment Readiness Program's partnership team. So just a few housekeeping items before we begin. Today's session is being recorded and will be added to Startup Canada's YouTube channel afterwards as a living resource. We also have a French interpreter available for the webinar today, as well as live transcriptions. So thank you, Nicholas Irvine, for joining us. You can select the corresponding channel at the bottom of your screen to access the French interpretation. We do ask that you please keep your cameras off and your microphones muted throughout the session. However, we do welcome any nonverbal feedback, so please feel free to use the reactions button in your menu bar at the bottom of your screens to give a shout out to our presenters, and we also welcome you to connect with each other in the chat. So if you have any questions for our speakers throughout the session, we do encourage you to please place them in the chat below, and we will flag them to our moderator and do our very best to have them answered live. So without further ado, to help guide our discussion today, we have our moderator, Tate Juniper, who is the Impact Fund Catalyst at Entrepreneur. Tate is Satu Deni and a member of the Daleen First Nations Band. Tate's work with Entrepreneur centers on creating impact investment opportunities for Northern Indigenous communities that really highlight financial sovereignty, sustainable and ethical practices, and the perspective of wealth creation throughout an Indigenous lens. He is guided by the belief that authentic representation comes through conversation and listening, and seeks to demystify what it means to be a contemporary Indigenous person. So we are so glad to have you here with us, Tate. And with that, I would like to invite Tate to take the floor to introduce the webinar and our speakers today. Tate, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. Like she said, my name is Tate Juniper, and I'm Impact Fund Catalyst here at Entrepreneur. My work is focused on access to capital impact investment for Northern Indigenous people, but I'd like to recognize that right now we're kind of speaking in a more broader sense for all of Canada. And I'd really like to, I guess, make acknowledgements of my grandparents, the late George Cleary and Doreen Cleary, my late father, Gary Juniper, and my late mother, Cheryl Cleary there. As she said, I'm Satu Dene. I am one of the Great Bear Lake people. But right now I live and was born in Yellowknife, which is Chief Dry Geese territory of Yellowknife Stannays First Nations. So for today's webinar, and I guess in general, for any entrepreneur starting out, it can be kind of difficult to navigate the journey ahead and to know what's really best for you. And furthermore, if your venture's core mission is social impact, this holistic approach to entrepreneurship comes with its own set of challenges and unique circumstances that you're going to meet along the way. So we'd like to take a minute to acknowledge all of you here today, the entrepreneurs, the change makers who are creating a more sustainable and equitable future through the innovation that you do, your understanding, and all of your hard work. Today's webinar is hosted by Startup Canada and Canada's Investment Readiness Program partnership team to kind of understand the do's and the don'ts around creating a sustainable business, how to navigate some of the common challenges associated with getting started, obtaining financial stability, and a couple other topics there. And we're hoping by the end of today's session, we're going to be able to have a couple of takeaways there, which is kind of understanding what social enterprise, social purpose organization, and what social entrepreneurship really means. They're kind of broad terms, they can be a bit vague to understand sometimes. So we're hoping that with our different perspectives from the different organizations we have and people here, we can kind of hone in more on what it means to us and what it means to you, the listener, as well. Um, we want to talk a little bit about navigating the impact measurements and some of the reporting you might have to do, because that can come with its own unique set of challenges, as I think we all know here as well. And we want to really make sure that you know how to operate better as a social enterprise business entrepreneur, and be able to balance your purpose and profits while learning and growing together with people in your network and just the communities as a whole there. The panel today, I'm very honored. We have some really amazing social impact entrepreneurs and some small business experts. We're very humbled to be sitting alongside Katrina Ingram, and I'd like to just do a little bit of introduction there as well. So for her, for over 2 decades of her professional life, she held senior executive roles in not-for-profits and in corporate organizations in the technology and media sectors. In 2021, as societal perceptions of AI, artificial intelligence, began to shift, she founded Ethically Aligned AI, a company focused on helping organizations drive better outcomes in design, development, and deployment of artificial intelligence systems. Katrina is a member of IEEE and volunteers with several AI ethics organizations, including Women in AI and Ethics for Humanity, All Tech is Human. She was named as one of the most brilliant women for AI ethics in 2022, one of the 100. She also hosts the podcast AI for Society Dialogues, where she combines her love of audio and interest in AI. And also Dr. Golnaz Golnaragi is an Iranian Canadian immigrant woman author, speaker, activist, and award-winning change maker. She's the founder of Accelerate Her Future, a leading career accelerator in Canada, providing tailored programs for and by Black, Indigenous, and racialized women pursuing careers in business and tech. A TEDx and Walrus speaker, Dr. Golnaz has been named a Globe and Mail report on business changemakers in 2021, and a Future of Good New Founders to Watch 2022. Her talks, work, and commentary have appeared in conferences, podcasts, journals, and media internationally. I'd like to thank the two of you and really, again, express great gratitude for you joining me today. And I want to give you the floor a bit just to say hello or to share anything I might have missed in those introductions there. And I'll start with Katrina there and give you the floor here.
Well, thanks so much, Tate, and thanks to everyone from Startup Canada. I'm super excited to be here with you. I feel that was a really thorough introduction, and I only hope I can live up to all of that during the panel today, but I'm really excited to be here.
And I would say exactly the same, Katrina. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to you, Tate, to Startup Canada and the Investment Readiness Program in Canada. Pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much. So I guess starting this off, like that's a pretty big question here, which is defining, social entrepreneurship, defining social enterprise, and we call them SPOs because there's a lot of 3-letter acronyms or TLAs in the industry. But what is entrepreneurship, social purpose organization, and social enterprise to all of you there? And I can kind of start off with what I think is the definition, which is I think the social entrepreneurship is something that just kind of encompasses businesses' approach to create positive social change. It comes from a more holistic approach to problem solving, which usually looks at the root causes, the social issues, and works to address them in ways that I think conventional business practices that are for pure profit don't really do. Usually it's trying to implement sustainable solutions and trying to make a longer lasting impact on society. And it's doing this through some conventional business practices, through technology, through data, and evidence-based research to identify some gaps in systems. And I think it's to develop solutions that can be scaled up to a global level, but I think we're recognizing more and more these days that we're also really trying to focus on more localized problems as well in our communities and different organizations and different areas and subsets of marginalized peoples. So I guess I'll start with you, Dr. Golnez, there, if you want to share what it means to you, social entrepreneurship.
Thank you so much, Tate. I think your definition aligns really, really well with how I would define it. It's interesting. For the longest time, I was trying to find definitions, and I really couldn't find one. I find people define social entrepreneurship so differently. Where I have landed on that definition is very much, again, aligned with what you said. So to me, it's about producing, creating products, programs, services that help solve a big problem, a big issue. And as you said, it's really about getting at the root cause. So traditional business, which is where I worked for many, many years before I embarked on launching Accelerate Her Future, tends to focus largely on generating profit or profit maximization for their shareholders. And one distinction for me for social entrepreneurship is that not only do we focus on purpose, but purpose with profit, and we consider a wider range of stakeholders that may include clients or customers, suppliers, certainly the team that we work with, beneficiaries, the community, and the environment, depending on where our impact lies. And in the case of Accelerate Her Future, which you explained what we do as a career accelerator, our values are really at the core of the work that we do, as well as our mission that's really embedded in the DNA of the organization, and the core business, core work that we do centers around intersectional gender equity. So what does that mean for us? It's really about creating a truly inclusive workplaces of belonging, so that more Indigenous, Black, racialized women like me can enter, engage, advance in their workplaces of choice, and where they thrive in conditions that are really supportive and inclusive, where they can be active participants at all levels of leadership. So it's about meaningful and intentional impact, and it's really not performative or about pictures on social media. It's really about, again, meaningful impact, meaningful change, getting at the root cause, as you talked to, and the purpose and the work that we do is embedded in our core business.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think that's really interesting, because I guess at the end of what I said there, which is something that I've thought a lot about in the past, and I guess I'm thinking a bit less now, is like this pan worldview of, creating solutions that will solve the problem everywhere. But as you talked about, as you work with these different groups, right, there's very nuanced and contextual solutions that have to be put in place, especially in Indigenous communities that vary incredibly over all of Canada and the world in general. But we're trying to move away from these pan-Indigenous worldviews in our own Indigenous communities, right? And that means we have to have more nuance and understanding when it comes to creating solutions that aren't just one fits all. And I think that that's really, really amazing that in the work that you do, you're really looking at those different lenses and working to make solutions for those groups.
You talked about moving away from one size fits all, and that's exactly what we always talk to as well. And you'll see in our team reflects the communities that we work with. So we don't have that top-down approach. We're very flat structure. The team, we say by and for, so the team has representation, and we all co-create with nothing about us without us philosophy. So that piece is really important.
Wonderful. I'd like to give you some time here, Katrina, to, I guess, answer that same question. I'm really excited to hear your answer, as you've been working in a field that, for me, AI has been really, I think, taking off the last couple of years. I'm sure you can speak to that, but what does it mean in that space, in that digital space, entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. And there's so much to build off of from what both of you have said about this space. And maybe just to add to that in a general sense, for me, there's this level of intentionality that I think is coming through in the responses that you've given, but I just wanted to maybe put on the table as well. In sort of thinking through your purpose, I think there has to be this specific intentionality to really focus on that social mission. And I think it's sometimes we kind of set up these polarizing dichotomies where we have maybe evil corp on the one side and this very nice, not for profit, this very pure kind of motive, not for profit on the other. And in the middle, there's a whole lot of, nuance, and there's a whole lot of space. And so when I think about the work that I'm doing, I think first and foremost about the mission. And for me, that's really centered around this idea of how do we navigate this world of technology? So specifically AI technology itself, which is becoming more and more emergent, especially in the last couple of months. I think many of us have probably seen the headlines about ChatGPT and generative AI and what does it mean for humanity. So a lot of my work really centered on that question. And it was about 2 years ago when I was looking at this space and looking at where things were going that I knew I really wanted to work on that question. I didn't really know at that point if there was a business model. In fact, to be quite honest, I'm still figuring out what exactly is that business model. But for me, it was really important to center that question and then try and build the business around it. And that's really been my approach to this work and sort of my approach to this idea of what is a social enterprise or what is a social purpose organization.
Thank you so much. And I think that that's a really good perspective too, because I think when we come into this space to be viable as a business and as a social purpose organization, sometimes you feel this pressure that, you know, even if you're not profitable because you're working with charitable dollars, like you have to really figure out that business aspect of it first, and then you go from there. But in reality, like you can be building the bike as you ride it in a lot of sense, because when you're purpose driven and when you're focused on this understanding and making sure that you're focusing on the impact and the societal problems you want to solve, you're not going to have all the answers right on how that's going to be a business model. And I think in AI right now, there's a lot of things going on in illustration communities is a big one, with all the issues with what they call scraping, which is art kind of being taken from artists all over the world and used through these AI models. And now a lot of traditional illustration entrepreneurs are finding that their work is being copied and used for free, and copyright laws are having an issue kind of cracking down on what's happening because there aren't a lot of regulations around AI, right? So I just think it's really interesting that, yeah, you're facing a problem and trying to make an ethical solution to something that's emerging right now, and you're not going to have all the answers right away just for that very reason. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I want to also kind of like, I guess building off that question is, for the two of you there, how would you classify or help people classify what it means to be a social purpose organization? And I think you kind of answered that in the sense of, you know, you don't really need to have the business solutions figured out right away, but the purpose is important. But do you think there's a middle ground of boxes you should be checking in order to make sure that, you know, as you get your entrepreneurial career or your social purpose organization off the ground, you're doing it in a way where you're building a solid foundation that will help you create that sustainability? And I guess I'll start with you, Katrina, because we just kind of built off that last one there as well.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And just to kind of maybe share a little bit more context. So my business is incredibly early stage, literally got off the ground in 2021. And the first 6 months were even just asking the question of, can this be a business, a social enterprise in the first place? And then just figuring it out since then. So we're just kind of barely at that 2-year mark. And it's very small in terms of staff. So at any given moment, obviously I've been working in the business, but I may have some people working on contracts, or I may have some other people with me. At the moment, I don't. So it sort of varied between being a few people to being one person. And that's the context in which I'm doing this work. So in thinking through, you know, what exactly are the check boxes, or what are the things that I should be looking at? I try not to set up the vast list of checkboxes. I know that, for example, organizations like the B Corp certification have a lot of guidance around doing X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C, but I think that needs to really be taken in the context of where you are on this journey. Because if you're looking at that vast laundry list and thinking, I'm not checking, you know, many of those boxes, it can be quite discouraging when you're just at the early stages and trying to figure it out. So that's the context I wanted to share. The thing that centers me is this question of, why am I here doing this work? And I keep coming back to that as a touch point. I know that I need to build this as a sustainable business, which means finding product market fit, finding customers, finding sources of revenue, and so forth. But my centering question of why I'm here is really important for me. So in terms of I wouldn't maybe say it's a checkbox, but it's something that I go back to, a touchstone perhaps, is that question. And that's what keeps me aligned in terms of my purpose.
And I really like that recentering of moving away from that check box there and more towards just like what grounds you in the work that you're doing, because we're all here because we are purpose driven, because we want to see changes, and we know that I believe that we all know these things are possible, and which that's why we're doing the work. And in my own work in the north here, like I work off of like a really simple motif, which is like I believe Indigenous success. I believe Indigenous people will be successful. And that allows me to think outside the box when it comes to loan programs and it comes to try and get capital and access to capability. Because if I believe in Indigenous success, then I will fight for more patient, more holistic capital being distributed, and I'll figure out a way to do that. But it's almost there's in the words of Caroline Hilton of Indigenomics. There, it's she believes in a possibility, and it's never no. It's how do I get 10 steps from here to yes. And I really think that's a really good way of going about it, especially when you work in some nonprofit spaces and government can take some time, and we want to work in, I would say, intergenerational change, because things just don't happen very quickly and we need to give more sustainable solutions. But it can be discouraging sometimes when you see gridlocks happening, and you have to, I think, really ground yourself in the belief that what you're doing is correct, right? And what you're doing is responsible, and centering yourself around those grounding beliefs. So yeah, thank you, Katrina. And Olnaz, I'll hand it off to you there for that same question.
Thank you so much. I so relate to what Katrina said. So this idea for Accelerate Her Future has been in me since, I would say, 2014, 2015, and it didn't really come to life, in a very small way until 2019. And it's been incredibly iterative. And I always say it's one of the most gratifying, but also one of the most challenging things I've ever done. Because again, I think we do things our own way. We don't necessarily fit into a checklist or a box. And we've made some choices. I've made some choices very much aligned with my value system. That means that we may not have the same, access to funding opportunities because we choose to operate very differently. So we're also very new. So contextually, even though we had our first pilot that we put out to the world in 2019, after COVID happened, we had to kind of step back and say, really, what are we doing? And we were very intentional about the pivots that we made. So I would say we've been operational in a meaningful way since 2021 as well. In terms of some things to think about around social enterprise, I would 100% agree with Katrina that your core values, your values and your why or your mission is at the core of what you do. It has guided me through some really tough moments, through decisions that I've had to make, and it's what fuels me and the team and keeps me and us going. So I can't stress the importance of that grounding as our anchor enough, for sure. I would also say, having worked in, more traditional purely profit-oriented environments versus, the work that we're doing now, which is kind of balancing the impact, to think about a few things if you're thinking about launching a social enterprise. One is what we've talked about, the mission, right? That has to be at the core of what we do. So really, what brings you alive and why are you doing it? So that's really core. It has to be core and embedded in the DNA. Second would be really thinking about your ecosystem and your community. I think that's been really key for us. As I said before, we have a nothing without us philosophy. So we have co-created, not just as a team, but with our community all the way through. How AHF came to be was through a design session that myself and one of my collaborators held back in 2018. And that really, our community was telling us, here's what we need. Here's, kind of what's working, what's not working, and what the possibilities are, as you said. So that part's been very, very important to us as well. And I think one final piece I'll say that's not often talked about, particularly when we, learn about social entrepreneurship, and that's the people within the organization, whether it's the founder, the co-founder, there is no one right way to doing things. We've been very iterative as well. We've followed the energy of what, you know, the community is telling us and where we need to go. But also as founders, we bring our own values, our cultures, all of, you know, what makes us who we are, and how we approach social entrepreneurship can really embody that. And I was at a session that was offered by an incubator by Sheridan Edge in Mississauga, and they talked about there's different Indigenous worldviews that can inform entrepreneurship. As a Muslim entrepreneur, maybe there's worldviews around like an Islamic way, a Muslim way of approaching a business that may apply. For me, for us, it's more of that intersectional gender equity, anti-racist lens to the work that we do. And so, you know, doing it on our own terms and being iterative is probably the best way I've been able to, and the team has been able to get to where we are over the last 2 years.
Wonderful. And I do really love that notion that if you're grounding yourself in your purpose and your mission, right, you can make those changes, and it's good to make those changes, right? As we move through this, I guess the systems of social entrepreneurship in nonprofit charitable space and for-profit social purpose organizations, right? You can kind of get, I think, lost in the sense of, you know, I guess one of the key distinctions of an SPO, a social purpose organization, or social entrepreneurship is, you know, you still are trying to generate a profit. And, you know, we talked about all the holistic and the dual mission of social environmental benefits, and we all are trying to create social benefit. But for people getting into social entrepreneurship, you still have to keep in mind the fact that, you know, like for a lot of your operations, if you're working in the for-profit space, you have to show that, you know, you're balancing your impact, and you're also balancing the fact that you can, you know, report back to shareholders. And I think that's a really challenging thing to do, because it's really hard to balance this notion of like, okay, we have to care, we have to worry about the impact, and that's the most important thing. But I also have to show and provide the fact that, you know, like this is a profitable venture, right? And having to find that balance and work between those worlds is a really challenging thing. Do you think there's any other key distinctions between, I guess, like a social enterprise or a business enterprise that you'd like to highlight, and maybe some takeaways people can have from that, and like what they should be focusing on, or just even key distinctions that like might fall into social enterprises compared to more traditional business enterprises? And I'll start with you, Gomez.
Sure. So again, I would say thinking about legal structure or business structure as an example, what's available to us here in Ontario would be very similar in Ontario. So not-for-profit, charity, cooperative, or for-profit are pretty much the options we have. But I think being guided by how to make the decision to find that right structure is important. And I think that can be guided by, for example, how will we generate revenue? Are we planning on having products, services, and programs? Who will pay for those services? How will we access funding, financing, et cetera? Those are some philosophical questions that you need to ask. And secondly, for us, we have opted to be for profit. Again, there's reasons for that, that the team has discussed at length, tied to our mission. And we are currently looking at the B Corp certification as a way of being transparent, showing our transparency around our approach to our business. Regardless, we have an impact report that we put out every year. Well, this is our second year, so the second one will be coming out soon, regardless of whether we have funders or not. So we feel like we owe it to our community to do that. And we can talk about that later. Second, it's the mission that we talked about, like being very clear. Third, for me, would be really understanding your stakeholders and going beyond just the shareholders. So really thinking holistically around balancing and being accountable to different stakeholder groups, like your team, like your employees, your team, your clients, your suppliers, the environment, et cetera. The piece around the impact, I think, is important. So you must be addressing a definable social or environmental issue, and working towards lasting, as you said, getting at that root cause. And for us, the measurement and telling the story of how we're impacting change is important for our community, again, moving beyond our requirements to funders. And so we focus, for example, on, we have an impact framework, and we focus on, if we look at one framework, the UN Sustainable Development Goals as one framework, we would focus on reducing inequities and gender equality. So we hone in on those things. We must be revenue generating, otherwise I won't be able to have a team that does the work. So I think the financial sustainability is important in that it allows us to deepen our impact and to be able to do the things that we want to do differently. And so 2 years ago, when we received investment readiness funding, one of our key areas of focus was, how do we diversify our revenue streams so that we can have deeper social impact? Without that, we won't be around. And so it's really important to consider those different pieces. And then finally, as you said, as the organization, as we grow in a very intentional way, we're not about scaling at any cost. That's not how we do things. So very intentional growth. We want to also show that we're not only sustainable, but we're contributing to our impact on an ongoing basis and deepening that.
Wonderful. And I really love that last piece there. And I think that in a lot of more conventional business, like this idea of like just unending growth, unlimited growth, right, is always kind of the most important driving factor for a lot of those businesses, which is like not this notion that if you get to a place and you're sustainable, that's amazing and you can stay there. And it's a lot of things we see, especially in northern communities, is some people just want to run their entrepreneurship business or their social enterprise to a certain level. And then they have that balance, because for a lot of people up here, the balance of culture and traditional life is very important. And they don't have to have unending growth and be a millionaire. They just want to be able to provide for their family, their community, and make time to spend time doing the things that as an Indigenous person, as a Northerner, are important to them. And I think that having that balance, especially when you're starting out as a social enterprise and entrepreneur and realizing that it might take more time, and the plateaus are the ones that you choose for yourself, not what society or other people have chosen for you as kind of this unending growth there. And Katrina, I really am excited to ask you this question as well, because I think that you really are navigating that still, and you're working through figuring out that business model, but you're purpose driven and the mission is really important. And I really strongly believe in what you're doing, because I think that ethical artificial intelligence is going to be a really important thing in the next 5, 10, and 20 years here. So I guess, how would you feel that question from the other side there?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to pick up on this idea of unending growth, because this is really a big thing in the tech industry and how technology companies are really funded. And so when people hear about my business, they pick up on this AI piece right away, and they're like, you should get some VC funding and you should take on all of, these different kinds of equity structures and so forth. And they kind of push me in a certain direction that I've really pushed back on, because quite frankly, many of those funding structures are not aligned with my values, kind of going back to that why and what do I want to be. And in fact, I think have actually been harmful for the technology sector overall. And that's something that I grapple with in terms of when you're an entrepreneur and you set up and choose business models, you're making value choices, you're making ethical choices. And sometimes those are going to push you into certain directions, perhaps, that you didn't even really know that you signed up for. And I see that story a lot in the technology space. So when it comes to my own business, it's interesting because Golnance has come out of the private sector and has that experience. I came out of the not-for-profit sector. I spent much of my time managing a community radio station in Alberta, donor funded for the most part. And so I saw things from that not-for-profit side. And that actually was what made me choose to decide to be a for-profit organization, which you might think is kind of odd, perhaps. But just to share a little bit more about this, because I think this idea of revenue and how we generate revenue really ties very closely to how you decide to set up your business. And right now in Alberta, we only have two choices as well, similar to Ontario. We can be a for-profit, we can be a not-for-profit. There's no special category for social enterprise. I know that's shifting in some of the provinces, territories, and some of the states, but here in Alberta, it doesn't exist. So you have to make this choice. And when you decide to be a not-for-profit, it can set up certain parameters around your organization. So you'll incorporate under the Societies Act, you'll have a particular set of things that you need to adhere to, such as having a board. Managing a board can be a lot of work. Managing a board can be a full-time job. Managing a board can take you away from perhaps revenue generation. So these are the kinds of considerations you need to think about. If you do become charitable, which is a bit different than just being a not-for-profit, but actually having the ability to write tax receipts and become charitable, now you have an even more restrictive set of agreements that you've signed up for under the CRA. And there's very specific things that you can or cannot do to generate revenue, depending on why you were granted that charitable status. And that's something that I became really aware of when I was running this not-for-profit that was also charitable. And we were trying to diversify our revenue stream. And we were looking at the things we could or couldn't do that were on side or not on side with CRA. And it was quite restrictive. And for those reasons, I decided for my own venture, I was going to go into the for-profit camp, but I was going to, again, be mission-centered, be mission-driven. So even though legally, for-profit, which has a lot of scope, let's say, about the ways you can generate revenue, you can really kind of move in a lot of different directions and not necessarily be restricted. But it's that mission that restricts me in a good way, I'll say. It keeps me aligned, keeps me coming back and focused. So that was really why I decided to set up my company as a for-profit, is that ability to be able to generate revenue and do things in a more flexible way while still keeping myself mission aligned. And I think that's really important for ventures, especially ones that are in newer spaces like mine, to have some flexibility built in, because you think you know how things are going to go. The plan will change. And you will need to change with that plan if you're going to evolve and be sustainable. So those are some of my experiences so far in running this venture.
Wonderful. And that's really amazing to hear too, as you switch, because I'm right now, I'm working in the not-for-profit sector with my own work as an entrepreneur here. And as I work towards creating this access to capital and creating this impact fund for them through the Northern Impact Fund, we're trying to get off the ground here. Like, there are a lot of different legal compliances that can be roadblocks, right? Things like public benefit is a really big one. We work in not-for-profit, is how can you prove that what you're doing is public benefits when you're working for, let's say, a subset of people. And you can talk about how trying to uplift and bring everyone to the same levels of equity, but you're still working through a lot of different legal compliances. You're still working through a lot of different challenges that you don't really face when you have less restrictions in a for-profit space. So I definitely think it's really interesting that you came from non-for-profit and you kind of switched there, because I think that's I think it's something a lot of people face in this sector, and I'm hoping that as time goes on and we start seeing more social enterprises, entrepreneurs moving into this space, like capital becomes a bit more fluid and understanding in the not-for-profit and the for-profit spaces, and people are able to access it a bit easier with less restriction. And I guess that's my next question here is this is kind of a Canada-wide thing here, and I know there's a lot of different streams of funding and avenues, but I'd like to ask both of you, I guess, centered around where you are or in the spaces you are, what are some funding streams that you know of, if you know of any, or any places people would be able to access capital from, I guess, your perspectives or the spaces that you are aligned with currently? And I'll start with one else there. I forgot to ask.
Did you say you'll start with Gomez with me?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. So I mean, this is the big question. I know within any community or with any social entrepreneur I speak to, funding and access to capital is a huge one. And when we look at the Canadian entrepreneurship ecosystem, when you look at women within that, lens, as an example, women receive a very small percentage of venture capital. I think the last report or stat that I saw was like 3% or 4% of venture capital dollars go to women. And when you look at racialized, Indigenous, and Black women entrepreneurs, that percentage is even smaller depending on the community. So I think that's the context within which we're operating. That said, with the choices that I've made have been trial and error, quite frankly, as I've learned and I'm learning. And so when I first started, I bootstrapped my way. You know, in a lot of cases, I also worked, and this was a bit of a side initiative. I would work to pay for the expenses and to bring AHF to life. Beyond that, the investment readiness program, the IRP, was the very first funding that we received. And that was 2 years ago. And that was really instrumental and so helpful in getting us started with some of the foundations. And it allowed us the opportunity to work with Zara Qureshi, who's founder of Social Venture Circuit and Optimum, in terms of building our financial reports, like really having that numbers focus to the work that we do, having KPIs that we look at and things like that, which is important when you're talking about funding and access to capital. So beyond that, we've also we're successful in another grant, the Skills Development Fund through the Ontario government. So there are grant opportunities for for-profit as well as nonprofit and charities out there. So on the for-profit side, they tend to be more limited, but I am seeing them, and where there's alignment, we've been applying. And that whole process takes so much time. That, you know, you could invest in the business or in your venture, but for the right opportunities, we have been applying, and we've been partnering with organizations as well where it makes sense, and that's been really, really helpful and impactful. So we did receive a skills development fund here in Ontario. That has been great. Also, given the work that we do, we have looked at corporate partnerships, particularly sponsorships initially, to get us going. And now, as we're building our services and programs that are revenue generating out, we're starting to increase year over year. We're tracking really well in terms of the revenues that we're generating from the products and services that we're intentionally putting out. And our focus is on individuals, so Black, Indigenous, and racialized women, as well as youth. So that would be the social impact piece in particular, is students and early career recent graduates. And we also focus a portion of our work on organizations, which would be employers and post-secondary and so on. So now, you know, again, really focusing on revenue generation from our programs and services has been a priority. The last piece that's not talked about is tapping into subsidies to hire interns and to hire people. So initially, when we started up, we found the CIC Can Career Launcher to be great. So a subsidy through that. TechNation Career Ready program. So these are some examples of resources that people can tap into. Canada Summer Jobs program, as well as Ripen's Level Up program, which is great. So those have afforded us opportunities to bring some interns in and do some work with us there while we mentor and create better pathways to employment. So I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Katrina.
Wow, that's a wealth of information. That's amazing. When I think about like how to fund a business and how to fund a social enterprise, there's sort of debt financing options. So here in Alberta, we have Alberta Women Entrepreneurs, which is an organization that assists women with access to capital, primarily through a loan. So that's one avenue. We also have the Social Enterprise Fund in Alberta, which is a similar arrangement. So it's similar to going to a bank to apply, but they'll take into consideration a lot more parameters about your business. So with Alberta Women Entrepreneurs, obviously needs to be a female-led business, women-led business. With social enterprise fund, you need to be a social enterprise in order to apply. And they'll generally give you more favorable terms than if you were just trying to knock on the door of your local financial institution. So that's kind of one option. I mentioned venture capital and equity options. So this is where some entity is taking a stake in your business in exchange for funding your business. And my advice with that is really, again, about the values piece. And if you're going to go that route, making sure that your values are aligned and you're not signing up for something that you're going to regret, or you're not signing up for something where that equity partner is going to be able to reshape your business, your organization in ways that you don't want it to be reshaped. So I think that's really an important component to think about when you're thinking about equity partners. Grants, obviously, the Investment Readiness Program was very instrumental in helping me and my business, and in fact was the first grant that I applied for and was able to successfully achieve. Since then, I've also been fortunate to have some other grant funding, primarily tied to hiring people. So I received a little bit of funding through NRC. They had a program that was really about getting new grads out and into organizations that were focused on technology. So I received some funding that way. And then locally here in Alberta, the Technology Alberta organization has some very small grants, again, aimed at providing opportunities for people, students in this case, who are new and wanting to get some job experience. And I was fortunate to receive a small grant from that program as well. So that's been really helpful in terms of providing more resource for my organization. But the primary way that I've been sustaining this business is just through generating revenue through programs and services and things that we offer as an organization. And that's been an evolving process. I was fortunate to land a significant contract for a business early on to develop Canada's first AI ethics micro-credential with Athabasca University, and was able to draw on some of my other prior work as an educator in order to move into this new sector of AI. So that was kind of a pretty big piece of substantial early work. And it's been finding those kinds of opportunities and really kind of figuring out, again, that product market fit for the services and eventually maybe products that I hope to offer through this company. That's been the primary way that I've been evolving. So a lot of bootstrapping.
Katrina, Tate, can I add one more thing I forgot to mention very quickly?
Yeah, of course.
For women identifying listeners and non-binary entrepreneurs that are pursuing social entrepreneurship, another great community to look at is Coreless, which is formerly SheEO. They have a really different model, and they offer 0% a perpetual fund that's loaned out to organizations that are selected, ventures that are selected, that are paid back, but there's 0% interest. And their approach is very different. I think to Katrina's point, it's not extractive. They don't get involved in your business and say, okay, the founder has to be moved and we need a guy to come in or whatever. They're very supportive, and it's a very unique approach for women identifying and non-binary social entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I believe that the startup will be sharing all of these links at a later time or after this as well. So it's really great that we have all these resources here. And yeah, I think my next question, which is when I hear all this, it's just really amazing to know all these resources are out there. But I think we also, we all know these resources have existed. There's been some, as people plugged into the network and the IRP network and working in these spaces for a while. I know that these grants, these funds, these loans are out there, but a big thing that I know, especially in the North, especially in a lot of marginalized communities, is if the capital and the grants are out of reach, in the sense that sure, you can see it, but how do you access it? And a lot of these things, you're writing proposals, you're needing to have what I would call sticky funding, which is, you have to write 3-year reports. So you have to measure your impact in ways that doesn't really align with how you perceive it or how you've done it traditionally, right? And I think in the current state of things, there are going to be times you're going to have to measure impact or report impact, or even like think about impact through the lens of your investors or the people who are supplying you with this funding and this capital. And I'd really like to ask both of you, how how have you done this, and what resources have you accessed if you felt like you've struggled at sometimes to, get reports out? And how would you suggest to the people listening right now that if you're struggling with writing reporting or struggling with proposal writing, like what would you suggest? Because I do know that's something that's really challenging, because yeah, to get funding is in its own right a lot of work, right? Katrina.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel this very directly as a solo entrepreneur most of the time. It's me who's writing that report. I guess maybe the first thing that I would say is when you are looking for sources of capital, really understand what the strings are that are coming with it, whether that is writing reports and so forth. Because sometimes if the investment isn't sufficient, then the amount of time that you put into accomplishing the check boxes that need to be checked in order to get that may not, the math may not work out well for you. So if it's a very small amount of money, let's say, but you need to do a very big amount of work and it's your time doing that work, maybe it's not worth it. So that I'll just say that before I even get into the writing of reports. One thing that I did while I was going through the investment readiness program is just I had a kind of a sense of what would need to go into a report. And I would make some notes on a regular basis for things that I would put into the report. So it didn't seem so daunting, like 4 months later when you're done, or 6 months later, and you go, oh my goodness, what do I have to now think about to go into that report? It was almost like journaling or documenting it a little bit along the way. And that made it a bit easier for me in terms of really having all the pieces together that I needed to write that report. It's still a lot of work, but it's not unlike, doing your bookkeeping on a monthly basis versus leaving it all till year end. It's just that much more daunting and overwhelming if you do the latter. So that's one thing that I think about. I think the other thing that I'll say is I think organizations are also starting to appreciate the amount of work that goes into these reports. And I've sat on the other side of the table where I volunteer as a board member on a foundation that gives out grants to the arts community. And we have these discussions about, well, these are small arts organizations. Is it really realistic that they're going to submit a 15-page, comprehensive report? Or, what do we actually need to know that we've done our due diligence? Maybe it's a one-pager, maybe it's a verbal report, maybe it's something a little bit different. So I think there are some conversations that are happening on that side of the table as well, to maybe get into some of the more non-traditional reporting practices and things that might make it a little bit easier for organizations.
Fantastic. And I really love that work as you go philosophy there is, a little bit at a time. And then at the end of it, your report is, maybe it's not together, but all the pieces are there, right? Pass that over to you there, Roland.
Thank you. I'm so encouraged to hear that people are having these conversations. That's really good to hear. So in our case, we actually started with creating an impact framework for the organization, regardless of whether we had funders or not, just to be transparent with our community. And the RRP grant that we received 2 years ago was very instrumental in that, as well as the CIC-CAN subsidy. So we were able to hire a master's of sustainability student who helped us create our social impact model. And that was like we co-created as a team and with our community and whatnot. So our framework is evolving. It's not static by any means. And as we kind of grow intentionally, we're kind of broadening it. So start with where you are and don't take on too much. But again, for us, it was important to show the world, tell the story of our impact, regardless of funders or not. And so with that, we have some clear, targets and things that we look out for as an organization when it comes to our beneficiaries, the social impact that we want to have, our customers or clients, as well as our financials. So for example, on the financial side, We have a thing where me and other more experienced people on the team will never make more than 3 times the lowest salary or pay. That's something we've agreed to, and that's set. Where we do have a surplus in a year, we will contribute a portion of the surplus into community. So this year was the first year we actually were in a position to donate to 4 organizations that are Black and Indigenous youth led, that the team voted on, and we all had a say, and we picked 4 organizations that we contributed to, and then reinvesting the dollars back in the operation and into the organization is another thing that we're committed to, as an example. And then some impact commitments that we have as a team to ourselves operationally as a team. So again, those guide us. And then the reporting is a whole other thing. I think having these things said, we're able to report more readily, but I'll say one of the practices that has been really helpful to us is we create a document that says, okay, these are the things we have to report on. Where is it going to come from? And just being, where's that data going to come from? That's been really helpful as we get into the reporting. Resources. So if you're looking at an impact framework, I'll give you 2 that have guided our work. The Common Approach to Impact Measurement is a great resource to go to. They have a very informative course, and then the Social Impact Institute's social impact canvases. That tool has been very helpful for us creating our impact framework.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those resources and your perspective and all that. I know we're pretty much out of time here. I want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end here, Rachel, so I'll hand it off to you there. But thank you 2 so much for sharing and speaking with me today.
Thank you, Katrina, Golnaz, and Tate, for all of your input and expertise today. A lot of really interesting insight and discussion shared today. So again, thank you so much. We do have a few minutes left. So at this time, I think maybe we have room for maybe one question from Jess, who asks, we are in the youth space where everyone assumes that we are a nonprofit. We lead by example as we coach students through social enterprise entrepreneurship, but do you have some key responses that you tap into when potential clients challenge your model?
Can I answer that? Oh my goodness, like that hits the core. We found the same. So I found that when I go out to the world and speak to those that may not really, may have work to do to understand equity, diversity, and inclusion issues and gender equity, when I say we are a career accelerator by and for Indigenous, Black, and racialized women, people automatically assume we're not-for-profit and a charity. And I want to say that not-for-profit and the charitable sector do really, really important work. However, as an organization, we really felt that we needed to counter this mindset that automatically puts us in that box. It tends to come from a colonial mindset, and also given the work that we're doing to address pay inequities and all kinds of inequities, why shouldn't an organization that's led and run by Black, Indigenous, and racialized women be for profit and have impact at the same time? So there's a time and place for not-for-profit and charity, important. We just didn't want to be seen as charitable, or a charity in the approach that we do. And so it's all about education, and it's all about just, again, with what Katrina and Tate have said, sticking to your values and trusting that your vision and what you believe to be true for you is the right approach and standing behind it. It's meant that we have less access to funding opportunities, and that's okay. We will innovate and find unique ways to sustain ourselves. It's a really good question.
Thank you so much, Golnaz. Tate or Katrina, do you have any other comments on that question?
I'll let Katrina answer if she'd like there, because I'm gonna just answer the second one I saw there in the chat while she does that.
Sure. I don't know that I have more to add to that. I personally haven't experienced that. If anything, it's been the other experience of, oh, you must be a tech company, you must be like super for profit and that kind of perception of my business. So I guess I just echo what Golnaz said. That's fantastic advice.
Perfect. So it looks like we're just at time. So I just want to take a moment to really thank you again to our esteemed speakers, Katrina Ingram, founder and CEO of Ethically Aligned AI, Dr. Golnaz Golnari, founder at Accelerate Her Future, and Tate Juniper, who is the Impact Fund Catalyst at Entrepreneur. So thank you so much for your time, providing your expertise today. And thank you to all of our attendees for being part of this session.